So the interesting thing about the early creeds, and we can start with Nicaea, though that's not necessarily the earliest faith statement. But there's a large misconception about Nicaea in Christendom. You can find all over the internet people claiming that at Nicaea the faith was once and for all settled. And by that they mean the Trinity. That the Trinity had always existed. There had always been this monolithic orthodoxy. And Nicaea was simply a defense against some novel ideas by Arius. They called them Arians to disparage it as perhaps something new, something invented by Arius. But in fact, the predominant view amongst Christians for the first several hundred years was a subordinationist view. Arius was a subordinationist. The Father is greater than the Son in both nature and being, or the Son takes his orders from the Father. This is the oldest Christian view. We find that despite the arguments of some modern apologists, that the ancient church fathers, 2nd, 3rd century, are all subordinationists. Clement of Rome, as seen in 1 Clement, Tertullian, Origen, Irenaeus, they're all subordinationists. By the time we get to Nicaea, we have the proto-Orthodox group as represented by the Alexandrians, Athanasius, Bishop Alexander, and they're pushing to really emphasize the identity of the Father with the Son as one of substance or essence. But what we see at Nicaea is there's still nothing about a Trinity. No Christian speaks about a Trinity of co-equal, co-eternal persons before at least the middle of the 4th century. Instead, at Nicaea, we see that the emphasis was on equating Jesus with God the Father in some sense, and they argued bitterly about what sense that was. But ultimately, at Nicaea, we see there's no mention of a third person, much less that this third person is of the same substance. But what there is an identification of the Father and the Son as one hypostasis. You say, well, Kegan, that's not in the Nicene Creed. But actually, affixed to the original Nicene Creed, there was a series of anathemas or damnatory clauses against certain heretical viewpoints. Obviously, they condemned the created Son, or the subordinate Son of Arius. But what they also condemned in those anathemas was anyone who said that the Father and the Son were not of the same hypostasis. Now this is incredible because later Orthodox councils, such as Constantinople, would expressly say that the Father and the Son are not the same hypostasis, but they are of different hypostases. And they say anyone who says that the Father and the Son are of one hypostasis are to be condemned. So we have the Orthodox councils condemning one another, damning one another. It's incredible. So the question then becomes, well, what does the language hypostasis mean? Does it mean substance? What did it mean at 325 at Nicaea? But it doesn't matter. Ultimately, what Nicaea presents is a Father and the Son who are of the same substance, but there's no qualification. There's no hope for qualification given. It does not explain in what sense they are thought to be distinct, only that they're thought to be of the same hypostasis, which may or may not be person, and of the same substance. So if they are of the same hypostasis, they are one person, as the creedal language would later come to be defined. So we could say then that Nicaea is a Unitarian creed. There's also this thought that at Nicaea the bishops had no idea that they would be setting forth the fundamentals of Christian doctrine for all ages. The whole situation was extremely political. And we have to ask ourselves even, why was the word homoousios even introduced? We can read several ancient historians, such as those with an alternate viewpoint like Philostorgius' epitome, and we can read that there was likely even a plan to oust Arius, the political opponent of the Athanasian party. And that is the precise reason why homoousios was chosen. Homoousios, of the same substance, had no relation to Christianity before that point, before it had been used by Paul of Samosata, who was likely a Unitarian of some variety. And that word had actually been condemned at the Synod of Antioch. They said, the Christians there, the bishop said, well, we don't use that word homoousios. Before then, it had only arisen in the theological language of the Gnostics, who had been thoroughly condemned by the Orthodox or the Proto-Orthodox party. And so we see that it was likely they resurrected that word in order to force the exile of Arius, who they knew would not accept it. So there were simply far too many political factors, too many personal issues involved at Nicaea to say that it was purely a quest for theological truth. We cannot also discount Constantine, the one himself who introduced the homoousion into the debate. At first, it had seemed Eusebius of Caesarea had helmed the formation of a creed which at first appeared to be palatable to both the Arians and the anti-Arians. They could interpret the big ambiguous language however they wanted. But of course, Constantine and the anti-Arians had to have their way. They had to expel Arius, so we introduced the homoousion, which he cannot tolerate. We see that the bishops probably did not think they were actually setting forth anything other than the defeat of Arius, by the fact that after Nicaea, all the bishops seemed to just continue on teaching exactly what they had beforehand, whether it was orthodox or not. Even Athanasius himself refrained from even using the word hypostasis or homoousion for many years. Of course, the homoousios created endless debates and was swiftly overturned by a variety of councils, many councils which I'm thinking of Remini Seleucia, for example, which had twice as many bishops as Nicaea did, had better representation from both East and West, and they thoroughly condemned the homoousios of Nicaea and continued to assert that God was one, that he was Unitarian. So we can say that Nicaea, in a sense, was Unitarian in that God was one hypostasis. And then all of the subsequent Arian conclusions that the councils made were obviously Unitarian as well. It would be when the Cappadocian Fathers in the late 4th century come up with the solution, the perfect fix, in which Gregory of Nyssa in his third oration admits he took a little something from Greek polytheism, a little something from Jewish Unitarian monotheism, and came up with something in the middle. That's when we really see, on a widespread level, the adoption of this polypersonal God in the creed. But before then, I think it's rather fair to say that for the first several hundred years, Christianity was Unitarian.